A reading from the book of Acts. While Peter and John were speaking to the temple, the priests, the captain of the temple, and the Sadducees came to them, much annoyed because they were teaching the people and proclaiming that in Jesus there is resurrection of the dead. So they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. But many of those who heard the word believed, and they numbered about 5,000. The next day, their rulers, elders, and scribes assembled in Jerusalem with Annas the high priest, Caiaphas, John, and Alexander, and all who were of the high priestly family. When they had made the prisoners stand in their midst, they inquired, "By what power or by what name did you do this?" Then Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, "Rulers of the peoples and elders, if we are questioned today because of a good deed done to someone who is sick, and are asked how this man has been healed, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel that this man is standing before you in good health by the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom God raised from the dead. Then Jesus is the stone that was rejected by you, the builders. It has become the cornerstone. There is salvation in no one else, for there is no other name under heaven given among mortals by which you must be saved." Now, when they saw the boldness of Peter and John and recognized that they were uneducated and ordinary men, they were amazed and recognized them as companions of Jesus. When they saw the man who had been cured standing beside them, they had nothing to say in opposition. So they ordered them to leave the council while they discussed the matter with one another. They said, "What will we do with them? For it is obvious to all who live in Jerusalem that a notable sign has been done through them. We cannot deny it. But to keep it from spreading further among the people, let us warn them to speak no more to anyone in this name." So they called them and ordered them not to speak or teach at all in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered them, "Whether it is right in God's sight to listen to you, or rather than to God, you must judge. For we cannot keep from speaking about what we have seen and heard." After threatening them again, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of the people, for all of them praised God for what had happened. For this man on whom this sign of healing had been performed was more than 40 years old. The word of the Lord.
I will fight for you. I always do until my heart is black and blue. I will stay with you. We'll make it to the other side like lovers do. I'll reach my hands out in the dark and wait for yours too, until I can wait for you. I'll wait for you. 'Cause I'm not giving up, no, not yet. Even when I'm down to my last breath, even when they say there's nothing left, so don't give up on. I'm not giving up, no, not me. Even when nobody else believes, I'm not going down that easily, so don't give up on me. Now I'll hold on to you, no matter what this world throws. It won't shake me loose. I'll reach my hands out in the dark and wait I will fight for you. I always do until my heart is black and blue.
You're done.
Well, good morning. We are excited to be back with you from a busy summer with these students. This summer we went to North Carolina for our mission trip, and the students are going to share with you about that in a few minutes. But I just wanted to preface with how hard these kids worked and how great this trip was. As we read previously in Acts 4, it talks about how, as Peter and John were before the council, they spoke about Jesus, and it says when they saw the courage of Peter and John and realized that they were unschooled, ordinary men, they were astonished. And that verse really sticks out to me in respect to these students, because this trip was a hurricane-focused trip. We went to North Carolina to do hurricane work, and we've done that before, but we've never been to a location on the East Coast like North Carolina. And these students are just like the students we've had before come through our ministry, but as we've looked back at this trip that we took, it seems pretty ordinary to us. We went and we did what we were supposed to do, and the kids were great, and we came home, and as we've been talking, there isn't really anything that stuck out about what we've done, and so we've kind of pondered why that is. And I think it's because these students are ordinary, but what God does through them is extraordinary. And so when we see the courage of these students and realize that they are ordinary kids, but we see what they're doing for the gospel, we get to be astonished, and we get to realize that these students have been with Jesus and that they know Jesus and that they're proclaiming that. And at the end of that text, it says they could not but speak of what they'd seen and what they'd heard. And that's how these students live their lives. And so what is extraordinary has become the rhythm of how these students live their lives and how they work for Jesus and how they live their lives according to the gospel. And so I'm going to invite our student speakers up this morning, and I'm going to have them tell you a little bit about our experience in North Carolina. This has happened to us 2 years in a row where we've signed up for a mission trip somewhere in the U.S., and a hurricane hits, and so we contacted the organization that we travel with and say, hey, is there a chance that you're going to open up a site there, because we've seen what's happened there, and so if you need hands there, we'll switch our sites and we'll do that. So last year we were signed up for a trip, and then the hurricane hit in Houston, and so we took off to Houston, and the kids worked wonders there, and they learned how to tape, and they learned how to mud, and how to drywall, and all of these really extravagant carpenter things that now these 16-year-olds are very good at. And then the same thing happened this year. We were signed up for a trip. Hurricane hit North Carolina, and so we contacted and we said, sign us up if you're sending people there. And so we were one of the first groups signed up to go. So we went to Wilmington, North Carolina for a week, not knowing what we would get ourselves into, but knowing what we had done the year before, and just really ready to be hands-on and serve. And so these students have done a lot of different work on this trip. They each were on different sites mostly, and are going to tell you about kind of all the different things that they got to do. So Zoe, why don't you start, and why don't you guys just tell us your name, your grade, and what you did on your work site.
Hi, so my name's Zoe. I'm a senior this year at Lamar, and on my work site this year, we did a lot of different things. So on the first day, we show up to our house, and they said, we need some volunteers to go under the house. And I said, okay. So they put me in a full hazmat suit, like it was bright yellow, and gloves, and like pull my socks up to make sure nothing like got in, and I had a mask and goggles, the whole 9 yards. And so they had me go under the house and cut out the waterlogged insulation and pull it out, and then we had to pull it all out from under the house. And we had a whole huge team of people, not only from our group, but from other groups who were also there just doing that. And then the second day was slightly less labor intensive, I would say. We did a lot of pulling nails out of studs in a house, and then we swept the floor to get all the dust and the dirt out so that they could come in and bring drywall after we had left. And then the third and fourth day, we did similar work where we showed up to a house that was brand new, like they were just building this house from the ground up. And they had put up the plywood, and it was standing, and we had to nail the plywood in. And that's kind of what we did the third and fourth day. And a memory that really sticks out to me from that is meeting this. We were at the third and fourth day, and we met this 17-year-old guy, same age as us. His name was Alex, I think. And he was a high schooler, and on his summer off, he decided that 3 days a week he was going to go work with Habitat for Humanity and help build these houses and help rebuild these houses and make sure that the people in his community could start to feel like they had homes again. And that was crazy. We took him out for lunch with us one day when we went. We just sat in the air conditioning so we could eat our food. And we talked to him about that. We asked him, why are you doing this? Like, why are you spending your summer willingly, doing very intensive, laborious work that's not fun? Like, it's not very fun. It was really sweaty and gross and just a lot of nailing. And I hit my thumb a lot of times. But like, he was there and he wasn't complaining, and he did all this work. And he said, well, my community is needing help. And who am I to stand by and like not help them? And so that really made me think. That's kind of what God taught me on this trip, is that, how astounding it is that a 17-year-old spent his entire summer just helping, and that how you can be going for 3 days a week and, building these houses for people, or you can be going for, 4 days in 1 week in the summer. And that's what you do, but that's still meaningful because God called you to do it no matter for how long you're there. And so if he called you to go 3 days a week, then you go 3 days a week and you don't complain. And if he called you to go for 4 days in 1 week, you go for 4 days in 1 week, and you get to praise that you get to do that for them.
Yeah, like Zoe said, it was very hot in North Carolina. At our site, which Braden and Lauren will probably talk a little more about, we were there from 9 to 3 each day, and we just left our van in the driveway running all day. And every 15 minutes, the kids would take a water break and sit in the van, and then get out and go work and sit in the van, because it was just so hot, and there was nothing else that we could do. And so we'd go to the gas station to go to the bathroom and get them in air conditioning, but they just worked nonstop, just dripping sweat. So it was great.
So my name's Emmy. I am a senior at Linn-Mar this year. And my group, we did a lot of mudding and drywalling, which is kind of what I did last year. So it was kind of cool to get to do that again this year. And basically what mudding is you just put mud on the wall and smooth it out. So yeah, pretty simple.
Hi, my name is Kylie, and I'm a junior this year at Linn-Mar, and I this year did a lot of sanding and mudding. So last year I also did a lot of mudding in Houston, but it was really awesome to learn a new kind of task and take it on. So I did a lot of sanding every single day. So it was a little bit dusty, but it was a good time.
If we could go back to that, yeah. That one. So this picture, this is the one I'm talking about. So right here?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. When we got to this site that we were at,
What's your name?
oh, my name is Brayden. I'm a senior at Linn-Mar. When we got to this site, this entire backyard over here was just covered in vines. We didn't see that car until about 2 hours into work every day. So what we did is we spent that whole time hedge trimming, cutting, doing anything we could to pull these vines out so that people could come in with the building supplies to drywall, paint, refloor, all the things that were necessary. Because this tree here went through this person's roof and hit their car. It was not a good tree for them. But we were able to get through, and it was hot, it was sweaty, but it was a good time. You trip over a vine, you laugh about it, and you move on. But it was a good way to really get to work. So.
Braden is downplaying the amount of work it took to access that tree. We started with the front yard, and the staff that assigned us to this house thought that we would only get the front yard that day. But our students worked so hard that we managed to get to the back of the house. And the back of the house was like grass up to here all the way, and the backyard was significant in size. And so they said, you can do it if you want, but we didn't expect you to touch it, so feel free to move on. And our students just started going in and pulling vines off of the gate in order to get into the backyard, and then just chopping down weeds and going back and forth and back and forth. And Alex ran into like 2 snakes as he just kept going back and back and back. by the time we found this tree, we didn't know that there was even a car under it until we got all of the vines off and all of the branches down, and then eventually cleared the entire backyard, took down as many branches as we could without jeopardizing the stability of the house, and it was cool.
So I'm Lauren. I'm a freshman in college, and I was also in Braden's group, which deforested this backyard. But on day 3, we had gotten so much done that they were like, we can send you to another location because there's not much more you can do here. So we went to this huge, what seemed like warehouse, and it was just floor covered with recliners, sofas, couches, pillows, chairs, anything you can think of that goes in a house. They were saving up for hurricane relief. So we entered the warehouse and we were like, wow, that's a lot of furniture. And they were like, we actually need all this furniture in a different warehouse. So we spent the day moving all of the recliners and sofas and chairs, what seemed like on planet Earth, into moving truck after moving truck. And we just had groups at both locations loading the truck, and then the truck had to drive like 20 minutes to get to the other location, and then they would unload, and then the truck would drive back. So we were just moving couch after couch, sofa after sofa, moving furniture all day.
Yeah, and these students were tremendous workers. I don't know if any of them are going to talk about that going forward, but we were at our site with 2 different church groups from, I don't remember where. Thank you, Connecticut and Minnesota. And on day 1, we saw a distinct difference between Iowa work ethic and other place work ethic. And our kids just worked nonstop. They would take a 15-minute lunch break in the van and eat their sandwiches and get back out. And the other groups would sit there being like, we have 45 minutes left. What are you guys doing? And they're like, no, we have a job to do, and we're going to get it done. And even at this warehouse, we had 4 different groups serving at the warehouse with our team. And one by one, we'd be like, hey, can you send another group to the other warehouse because we're working too fast and they can't keep up. So then we have 3 groups, and then we have some there. And we're like, hey, our kids have this. Can you send another group over there? And we'll keep working. And by the end, it was our 4 students, our 2 leaders, and all of the other groups at the other warehouse, because our kids were just rock stars and moving all this stuff and working nonstop. They worked past the end of the day. They worked until they got it done. It was incredible. So if you guys can just tell a story from your work site now of what you did or what was significant, if you have one, Ruffin.
I talked too much the first time, but I have another story, so I'll just do that one. I remember the first day, which is the day that we were under the house insulation. I remember we stood inside the house and they're like, we need volunteers for people to go under the house. Because there were some people who just stayed and took stuff out from the actual house and not from under the house. And they were asking for volunteers, and I was like, I'm small, I'll put on a hazmat suit and I'll do it. And I remember waiting out there, and Cole comes out of the house and he's like, I guess I'm doing this too. And he just, like, his face was not excited. But this kid put on his hazmat suit and he was like, I really don't want to do this. And he went under there maybe once, I think. But he went under there and he was like, guys, I hate this so much, but I'm going to do it anyway. And we're like, that is the spirit. Because, none of us really wanted to go under the house with an X-Acto knife and pull out waterlogged insulation. But it was sort of like it doesn't really matter if I don't want to do it right now, because it matters for this person who's trying to get their life back together and trying to get their house back and trying to have a home again. And so we can push past the little bit of fear, the little bit of uncomfortableness that comes with doing stuff like this, and we can push past that for their sake.
So we were at the same work site all week, and on the 4th day, probably like our last 45 minutes of being there, our homeowner shows up. His name was Mr. Skinner, and we just kind of wanted to talk to him to see what it was like for him when the hurricane came. And we learned that his wife had had a stroke right before the hurricane happened. And so he put her in a nursing home in a different state. And then he said it was his 5th hurricane that he had been through in that house, and this was like the worst damage he'd ever seen. And so then he was commuting back and forth between seeing how the house was and being with his wife, and his insurance didn't really cover anything. And he was just about to sell his house, like that day, ready to put it on the market. And the guy in charge of us, like coordinating us, called and said, we have people to send to your house. to help you rebuild it and do all that. And he was so thankful and so grateful. And so then he was still commuting back and forth, so that's why he wasn't there the whole week. And we got to pray over him and be with him, and he showed us this huge scrapbook full of pictures from like right after the hurricane, and there was so much mold and just so much damage, and he lost all of his pictures that he had and just everything. So it was just so cool that we got to meet him and hear all about his story.
I was on the same work site as Emmy, and I think that the coolest thing about it was just the fact that every single day we would go back to the church that we were staying at, and all of these other people would talk about the crazy stuff that they did every day, and just like how they got to switch different sites and meet homeowners and everything. And our work site was at the same place every day, and we were just mudding and sanding, and so it was kind of, we kind of just felt like we weren't doing as much as the other groups and everything, but on the last day we just kept working hard every single day and mudding and sanding, and like she said, on the last day in the 45 minutes we were about to pack up, we got to meet our homeowner, and that was just really awesome and really impactful because all week we've been working super hard and just doing our best to try and restore this man's home that we had just heard about, but on the last day we really got to put a face to what we were working towards, which just makes everything 100 times more meaningful. And so just to see the impact that we got to leave on him was really incredible to experience.
So last year when we were in Houston, we did a lot of drywalling, and so on our way to North Carolina, that's what I thought we were going to do. When we got to North Carolina, that's what I thought we were going to do, and we pulled up to this site, and I looked in the front yard, and I went, whoa. I was not really thinking that this is what we were going to be doing, but I'm so glad that we did it. We got there, and it eventually kind of felt like our group kind of took the reins on things, and we're saying, okay, you grab that lawnmower, go work on that. You get the hedge trimmer, go do that. And it worked like a well-oiled machine by the time that we left there. It was good to make those bonds with people, and you tell a joke while you're working, and you all work together as a team, and that's one of my absolute favorite things about these trips is like to meet people here and elsewhere and work as a team with them and eventually get it done, because that was all 4 foot of grass at one point, and now I can look at that picture and go, that's pretty cool.
Back at the warehouse, I remember it being like 3 or 4 o'clock. It was towards the end of our day back when we were, it was time for us to go shower. I remember the director coming up to our group and being like, you guys don't have to like finish this. We know it's your time for showers. And we're like, oh, we're going to finish it. So we had moved the rest of the furniture out onto like the concrete, as you see here, just because it was easier to move into the moving truck. And so we had 2 trucks left, and we were like, we are going to get all of this furniture in these last 2 trucks if it's the last thing that we do. So we loaded each recliner. We were like stacking them on top of each other. It was like a huge game of Tetris. We were climbing into the back of the truck. Like the small people were trying to fit everything where they could, and we finally got to like the last 2 recliners left in this truck that seemed packed full. And we were like, we don't know, we have to get this because we're not going to send a truck with just 1 chair in it. So I remember just climbing back underneath this table and then up. I had to like hold a recliner while the other person like put it on top. It was just crazy, but we ended up getting it to fit, and it was just so cool that we were able to finish the job, even though it was time for us to technically leave, but we were like, we're still going to finish it anyway because, we started this job, we're going to finish it, and it was just really cool to see how thankful the people that were working at the site, how thankful they were for us finishing it, and so that was really cool.
Yeah, and that could have been the end of their workday, but on the other end is the other warehouse that needs to be unloaded. And so not only did our students finish their warehouse when they didn't have to, but then chose to go to the other warehouse and help finish unloading the 2 moving trucks that were full of the furniture that they had already loaded. And so they just worked so hard this entire time. Why don't you go ahead and tell them what you learned on this trip, what God taught you, what it meant to you, as we wrap up here.
All right, so I kind of talked about this before, but I think on this trip, it really just hit my heart that you have to listen to what God calls you to do. So if God calls you to, work 3 days a week in your summer that you wanted to go to the pool and you wanted to do this and this, then you do that. And if he calls you to go on a mission trip, not for a very long time, but for long enough that you can do stuff, if he calls you to do that, then you have to listen. And if he calls you to go under a house, you have to go under that house because you're called to. And you have to listen to his voice, and you have to listen to the opportunities in front of you, knowing that you need to decrease and he needs to increase in that. That you listen to what he says, and you know that how uncomfortable you are, and how scared you are, and how much you really just don't want to do it. Like, that doesn't matter in that moment, because you have to do that. You have to do that for him, and you have to do that for the people around you, and that's just very important.
At the beginning of the week, I felt super discouraged when we got back to the church that we were staying at, because I got to kind of hear how everyone else was talking about being in hazmat suits and cutting down a jungle. And I was like, well, I'm just putting mud on walls. Like, that doesn't seem super important to me. But God really taught me that he works in the small things as much as he does in the big things. Because while I thought we were just putting mud on walls, we got to see the huge impact that it was making for our homeowner, and just like how much that meant to him, and how he got to see God through that. And he got to know God more because of that. And so, like, yeah, the small things are just as important. And like Katie said earlier, us being ordinary lets Jesus be extraordinary. And when we're ordinary, people get to see how extraordinary Jesus is.
I think that the biggest thing that I learned is just how important it is to just stay faithful, because like our homeowner, for example, he was going through so many trials, and he was just feeling so discouraged. But through it all, just him staying faithful and just trusting in the process and in the journey that God has for him was just incredible to witness. So just seeing how appreciative he was, and just seeing how we could help to rebuild his home and turn his home into a home again was super awesome. And even when we were praying over him, it was awesome because we could really see and hear God talking through him and just working in his life to try and get it back on track. And seeing him and hearing him say how much of an inspiration we were to him was just really encouraging. And it was just amazing to see how through everything that he's been through, so through all the trials, he is just staying true to God and trusting in the process that everything will work out in the end. So that was a big thing that I took away.
Never, other than this trip, never has the phrase "the hands and feet of God" meant so much to me. And yes, in a work way, but more in a personal manner. I spent a lot of time in my junior year of high school kind of mad because as a high schooler who doesn't want to go to parties or get into some questionable activities, it becomes harder and harder to find people to lean on. And this entire trip was me being surrounded by people just with a tremendous outpouring of love and support, and me being able to rest easy at night, knowing that if I need to talk to someone or I'm seeking counsel, these are the people that I'm going to talk to. These are the people who will stay up late with me. These are the people who will get up early. These are the people that will come help me if I need it. These are the people that I will remember. And it wasn't really until this trip that I realized that, and it really wasn't until this trip that I had experienced that. So I'm very thankful for God putting these people into my life, and me noticing that these people were put in my life for a reason.
I remember just being so completely overwhelmed by the way that I saw God working through each and every person on this trip. No matter if it was day or night, you could just see the way that his love was just pouring out into each and every person, and the way that they were showing that in every interaction, every work project. You could just see that every person on this trip was just so incredibly filled with just love and grace from God. And I just remember being, especially in our work group, seeing God highlight every single one of each person's talents, and putting them where like he knew that they would do best. And just the teamwork on our whole team was just incredible.
Yeah, so we just want to thank all of you for supporting these students, whether that's in Lent dinners or your prayers, your support. These students cannot do this experience and in the manner that they do without your help and without your support. So thank you so much for supporting the students who are here, who are not here, and supporting Edge as a ministry, because that's a place that these kids get to meet these people and do these things. And so we're really thankful for you all, and thankful for the leaders of this trip who take time out of their weeks and out of their summers to go on these trips with these students, and to these students themselves for just being rock stars.